morning, church. Good to be with you all. I want to take you back in time, long ago in 1994. In 1994, there was a young couple that decided to get married, and they did something that I would recommend every young couple do in their first year of marriage. They quit their jobs, they moved across the country, and they started a startup. By the way, I'm joking, don't do that. But they started a startup around a piece of technology that only 30% of Americans were utilizing at the time to sell books. They were going to use dial-up internet to start a business. And they called this business Cadabra, but they didn't like the name very much, so they changed it a couple months later to Amazon. And that bet really paid off, because Amazon, as you know today, is worth at least $2 trillion. And everyone knows the name Jeff Bezos, but you may or may not have heard of the name of Mackenzie Scott, who was his partner at the time and now former partner. And recently she was in the news because Mackenzie Scott and Jeff Bezos, they divorced, and when she walked away from that marriage, she walked away with $35 billion worth of Amazon stock. And that's a huge, unthinkable number. And when that happened, the reason why she was making all the news headlines was not so much because of the amount, although that was big. It was because of a statement she made following the amount that she received. I'm going to go ahead and read that statement to you. She said this: "We each come by the gifts we have to offer by an infinite series of influences and lucky breaks we can never fully understand. In addition to whatever assets life has nurtured in me, I have a disproportionate amount of wealth to share. My approach to philanthropy will continue to be thoughtful. It will take time and effort and care, but I won't wait, and I will keep at it until the safe is empty." Scott made this statement a couple years ago, and you may be wondering, well, has she followed through on her statement? And the answer is yes, quite a bit. She has given away over 70% of the $35 billion that she received. It's billions of dollars towards the arts, towards education, towards justice initiatives, towards the environment, and so on and so forth. And when we hear stories like this of someone like Scott with billions of dollars doing this kind of good work, it's easy to celebrate. And of course we're going to celebrate it because we see the difference that she is making. And it's really easy for us to say someone like Mackenzie Scott with billions of dollars, with a heart of generosity, truly changes the world and truly makes a difference in our communities. And it's very, very easy for us to say that about her and what she's able to contribute. But when we think about ourselves, when we think about what we can contribute to the world, what we can do, when we think about our own generosity, we don't tend to think of ourselves in that framework or in that capacity that much. We don't think we can make the same amount of impact that she has. And part of the reason why we often feel this way is because I think we live in a world where we underestimate the power of small acts, in a world that is smitten with big deeds. We live in a culture where big and better is beautiful. And we judge everything by the standard of bigger and better, including the ways we think about generosity and the ways we think about difference making. Case in point, if you looked at headlines recently in the newspapers, have you ever read a story about small church of 10 people feeds the people in their community once a week? Probably haven't seen that headline. But if you go online, you'll probably see headlines about First Presbyterian Church of Fort Smith. They canceled $17 million of medical debt in their community. You've probably heard of Father Gregory Boyd and his ministry that allowed formerly incarcerated gang members, 10,000 of them, to be educated and to receive a second chance at life. You've probably heard of Brian Stevenson and his group of lawyers at the Equal Justice Initiative who have overturned over 130 cases of death sentences that were wrongfully put on people and they were released from prisons. You've heard of all of these big news stories and the differences that people have made. And it makes sense, and you can see how it is that we can say they have really changed their communities for the better. But then, when you think about yourself, or I'll just put myself in there, when I think about myself, it's easy to think, well, I'm no Brian Stevenson. I'm no Mackenzie Scott. There's no way I can make that sort of difference. And yet, we belong to this community here at Rainier View, where one of our values, one of our core commitments is to be wildly generous with our time, abilities, and finances. When you walk into the church and you see that wall, you will see the poster there with our core value. And I'm convinced that most of us believe in the statement. We want to live out the statement. We see the inherent good of being a generous person with our time, abilities, and finances. But there's several things that get in the way of our ability to live this out. And we're going to go over several of them over the next few weeks. But for this morning, I think one of the reasons why is because we don't think we have enough to offer. And this morning, I want to take us to the 6th chapter of John to read a story of Jesus feeding 5,000 people. And what Jesus presents to us here in this story is, I think, something along the lines of this, that when it comes to enough, it's not so much about what we have or what we can do. But I think what the story reveals to us is that enough has to do with how we see reality. And the point of the story, I think, is that how we see reality is ultimately going to shape our generosity and how we show up in our generosity. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn to John chapter 6. If you want to read along, you can do so in your own scriptures. If you can go ahead and throw that up on the screen. John chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, that is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover festival was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have 8 buckets." Another of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many?" Prior to this chapter in John, we see Jesus do the impossible. He turns water into wine at a wedding. Jesus heals a disabled man. Jesus also just speaks words and he heals someone from a distance. He doesn't even have to be in the room with them. He doesn't even have to see them. He was able to do that with just his words. And his disciples got a front row seat to all of that action. And some people in the crowd also saw that as well, and that's why they were gathering around him. And you would think, as Jesus' disciples, having seen him turn water into wine, having seen him heal people, that they would think that Jesus could do something as simple as feeding 5,000 people. Well, not simple, but something as miraculous and unthinkable. And you would be wrong. Jesus' disciples hear from Jesus, "Hey, how are we going to feed these people?" And they think Jesus is crazy to even ask the question. Jesus wants to figure out how to get food for the crowds that are there, and he wants to test them. And the disciples say, "Well, it's impossible, Jesus, for us to be able to gather enough food to feed the crowd that is before us." And they say it's going to be about a half year's worth of wages, which, if you do the math, and I think I did it correctly, it comes out to an average of $31,000. So I want you to imagine this morning, Jesus comes up to you and say, We need to feed second service for Mother's Day. We need to feed first service for Mother's Day. We also need to feed Graham Campus. Who has $31,000? Your answer would be that, right? You would say, Jesus, we don't have $31,000. We can't even go to Marzano's this evening. What are you talking about? Why would you even ask such a question? And so the disciples naturally respond with, no, Jesus, we cannot do that. But then think about, in contrast, there is a child there, a small boy. And the boy says, well, I got 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And all the disciples look at the boy and they're like, well, that's something, but that's not going to do anything. What's going to do in a crowd of 5,000 people? And if you've read the story before, you know exactly how the story ends. We're going to go ahead and finish it up here. You could throw it on the screen. Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves, gave thanks, and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. When they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. So Jesus performs this unthinkable miracle of multiplying the loaves and the fishes, and everyone has more than enough to eat. And my favorite part of the story is there's a bunch of leftovers, and everyone is happy, and everyone is satisfied, and we can celebrate this. But I want to shift our attention a little bit away from the grandness of the miracle back to the disciples and the young boy and the contrast between the two. And there's 2 things I want to point out. Number 1, the disciples, most likely because they were already working by the time Jesus found them, probably had way more to offer than the young boy. Young boy had 5 loaves, 2 fishes. The disciples, they didn't have $31,000, but they certainly could do better than 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And yet, they say, we can't do anything. And the young boy says, well, this is what I have. And I think the reason why there's a difference between the two is my second point here, is that they saw reality differently. And because they saw reality differently, that changed the way they showed up generously. Let me focus on the disciples first. What the disciples saw as their reality was their scarcity. What they saw was what they were unable to do. What they saw was what they lacked. The center of their reality was who they were and what they could do and what they could offer. And because of that, the disciples concluded, well, Jesus, you're asking for this big and impossible thing, but we have nothing to give you. What was most real to the disciples was their lack and their inability. But then compare that to the child who was also there. For the child, his eyes weren't so much fixed on the crowd and what he had. His eyes, I think, were fixed on who Jesus was. He saw the one who turned water into wine. He saw the one who is able to heal the sick. He saw the one who can speak a word and change one's reality entirely. And this child saw in Jesus someone who was enough that even if what he had to offer wasn't enough, he wasn't fixated on his reality. He was fixated on the reality of who Jesus was in that moment. What was most real to the child was not who he was, but Jesus was at the center of his reality. And so the child offers even the little he has, not because he thinks it's enough, but because he trusts that Jesus is enough. And this is why time and time again, Jesus says throughout the Gospels, you have to become like a child. You have to have childlike faith. The kingdom of God belongs to these little ones, because so often in the world, we get caught up with big things and big deeds, and we scoff at the idea. We despise the ideas of loaves and fishes and of small acts of faithfulness mattering. We usually say, oh, none of that matters. And if we give into that temptation, if we live into that worldview, if we accept that that is our reality, just like the disciples, we will fail to be generous, because we will say what is most real to us is what we lack and not who Jesus is. This preaches well out of VBS. This preaches well out of church. This is a statement that we can all get behind and say, yeah, that sounds right. But also, you may be feeling, it seems like it works well in church talk. That seems like it works well in a Bible story. But how does this actually play out in real life? Do small acts of faithfulness actually matter? Does our limited time, abilities, and resources actually change the world for the better? Can Jesus actually use the smallness of what we have? And there's several stories I can share this morning, but there's one that stuck out that I wanted to tell you about a small act of faithfulness that was multiplied. And this is the story of Hattie Mae White. You may have heard of her. She was a little girl living around 1912, and she attended Grace Baptist Church in Philadelphia. And I believe she was around 7 years old at the time where she tragically died. And the pastor of the church, Pastor Cromwell, he was asked to be at the memorial for the family and to speak at the memorial. And right before he got up to speak, Hattie's mother came up to him and offered him a gift. And that gift was Hattie's purse. And inside Hattie's purse, the pastor found just 57 cents. And he was a bit confused, and he was like, why are you giving me 57 cents? And the mom replied to him, well, that's because this is the money that Hattie set aside because she wanted to help expand the gospel message in Philadelphia, and she felt like what she had to offer could make that happen. And so the pastor said, wow, that's amazing. Like that's such a great illustration of faithfulness. He did what every pastor does. He took that as a sermon illustration, right? And then he went up to the pulpit and he preached a sermon for Hattie's life and celebration. And he talked about this person. He talked about these 57 cents that she set aside for the mission of Grace Baptist. And the entire congregation was so moved by it, they decided to host an auction for her 57 cents. And each of those cents sold for much more than what they were worth. And collectively, they were able to bring in $250. At the time of 1912, $250 is quite a bit. They were able to expand the church, which then allowed them to expand their education outreach, which became this thing called Temple University. And that also extended into Samaritan Hospital and so on and so forth. And overall, according to the sermon that he gave, here are the statistics of how far those 57 cents went. 5,600 additional people who joined the church and found new life in Jesus. 30,000 people annually received care in the Samaritan Hospital, and 80,000 students were educated at Temple University. Through Hattie's 57 cents, over 100,000 people were impacted. And here's a really cool part about this story. If you go to Philadelphia, all three of these institutions still exist. You still have Grace Baptist Church. You still have Temple University. You still have the Samaritan Hospital, which became the University Hospital. I think the point of this story is something that I've been saying over and over again throughout this message, is that how you see reality will ultimately shape your generosity. And Hattie saw reality for what it was. She saw that this was God's world, that Jesus is truly with us. And so even the smallest of our offerings can be multiplied in his hands. Now that's great for Hattie. The question for us today is, what do we believe? Do we see the same kind of reality that she saw as well? Do we really believe that this is God's world? Do we believe that Jesus is with us? Do we believe that the Holy Spirit can work through us and around us, and that even the smallest offering that we have can be multiplied beyond what we can ask or imagine? I think that this morning there's probably quite a bit of us who come in here who look at our time, who look at our abilities, who look at our resources, and the conclusion we draw is we just do not have enough to make a difference. And especially as you look at the world around you, as you look at Parkland, as you look at Pierce County, as you look at all the problems, you may feel like you do not have enough and you are not enough. And I want you to remember this, if you don't remember anything else, is simply this. You are right. You aren't enough. You don't have enough. If you had 5 loaves and 2 fishes, that's simply pretty much all you have. And if you had $35 billion, guess what? You will not be able to save the world. That's not your job. It's Jesus' job. Jesus is the one who can save the world. Our job is to show up and to be faithful with what we have. And thanks be to God that it is not our job to save the world. Generosity is not about who we are and what we have and what we can do. It's about who Jesus is, what Jesus can work with, and what Jesus can do. This morning, I want to invite you to shift who is at the center of reality. At the center of reality is not me, it's not you, it's not what we lack, it's not what we can do or what we can't do. The most real thing in our lives, if we choose to see it, is who Jesus is, what he can do, and what he can do on our behalf. And he's the one who's saving the world. He's the one who's renewing it. We are just joining it alongside his mission. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to be talking more about generosity. Today, we talked about how one of the things that keeps us from being generous is this feeling of we are not enough and we can't make a difference. Next week is going to be fun. We're going to talk about greed. The week after that, we're going to talk about contentment. I know, really, really fun weeks. And then the final one is going to be maybe some teachings we may have heard about generosity that might keep us away from practicing it ourselves. But for today, I just want to keep things really simple for week 1 and just give you these 2 next action steps to take this week. And they're this. First of all, I want you to ask yourself this week, what is the reality that I see? Who is at the center of reality for me? Is it one focused on what I lack, what I can do, what I cannot do? Or is it one fixed on who Jesus is? And then secondly, I just want you to be praying this prayer throughout this series, and it's a simple sentence. Lord, how are you inviting me to be wildly generous? Will you pray with me as we close this morning? Jesus, I thank you for being the wildly generous one who has shown us throughout the Gospels what it means to give oneself away. And it's because you have laid down everything, including your very life, that we can have new life with you. And we don't take that for granted. God, I ask that as we talk about generosity these next few weeks, particularly today, I ask that we would be a people who do not despise small acts of faithfulness in a world that is captivated by big deeds. Help us to be a people to understand that, God, you are enough, that you work with what we have, that you invite us into your mission of making all things good, new, and true, and beautiful again. So, Jesus, I ask that as we think about our reality and what is most real to us, help us not to center our lack in our inabilities, but help us to see you at the center of it all and who you are and what you can do, that we may be shaped to become wildly generous people with all of our time, with all of our abilities, and all of our finances to your glory. We pray this all in your mighty name. And all God's people said, amen.